All right, then, I guess we can slowly get started. Welcome, everyone, to this session about the Ceph Dashboard. My name is Lenz Grimmer. This is actually my third SUSECON now that I'm talking about this topic in one way or another. Me and my team joined SUSE, exactly. Well, the announcement was 2 SUSECONs ago. We were part of the first acquisition that SUSE ever did. Me and my team used to be working on the OpenAttic project. Well, we still do, but our main focus of development has changed a bit. And I would like to kind of give you an update and share the story of the evolution of where we started with OpenAttic as being an independent Ceph monitoring solution to the dashboard that we are not talking about. First up, I would like to have a quick round of hands. Who of you is actually actively using Ceph in production? So there are a few, okay. Who of you has never heard of Ceph and isn't sure what this is all about? Just to make sure that I'm starting at the right level. So the topic is, you have a Ceph cluster. How do you gain insights into it? How do you manage and operate it? And there are, as I said, OpenAttic is a solution that we develop at SUSE that performs this task. But a while ago, our team had the opportunity to shift our focus of development and actually contribute to a built-in management and monitoring solution as part of the upstream Ceph project. We started that effort almost 1.5 years ago, early 2017. And I'm going to start by giving you an update on where we're coming from. So the Ceph by itself didn't really have a graphical user interface for a very long time. It was the first time in the Luminous release that there was what we now call the Ceph Dashboard V1, since it was the first implementation. And it was part of the Luminous release, which also is the foundation of the version of Ceph that is shipped with SUSE Enterprise Storage 5. So if you're familiar with SES 5 and the Luminous release, that actually comes with this little thing here. That's the dashboard that shipped with Ceph Luminous. Well, the name already applies it. It's more or less just a read-only dashboard. So you can take a look at some Ceph-relevant metrics, like the health status. You can take a look at the Ceph logs, take a look at the list of nodes that you have in the OSDs. And from its entire architecture and design, it was, aimed at being an easy solution to displaying information. For example, it didn't have a notion of user management. There wasn't even a login screen or something. It didn't use SSL. It was really something that you can enable in the Ceph Manager and point a browser to and have it running on a screen somewhere in your data center. So if you're running SUSE Enterprise Storage 5 by any chance, you can actually enable that dashboard and take a look at it. But in SES 5, our primary management and monitoring solution is, of course, OpenAttic that we install and deploy as part of the installation process. So back then, being that upstream Ceph, many people started adding, using it and added contributions to it. So after the Luminous release was published, people started adding more detailed information, but there was a kind of growing desire or demand from the Ceph project themselves to have a more mature and more powerful management and monitoring solution. And that's basically when our team approached the upstream Ceph community and told them, hey, we have this thing called OpenAttic. We have gathered quite a lot of experiences with that. What about thinking about implementing something like that as part of the Ceph core project itself? And that's how our development started. We went through a proof of concept first to showing off that we're actually capable of doing that, and then started working on enhancing and updating the existing dashboard and the architecture to make it more applicable for adding all the functionality that we had in mind. And the first incarnation of that one can be seen in the Ceph Mimic release, which was released mid of last year, if I remember correctly. That's when the dashboard V2, as we called it, showed up for the first time. And if you have been using OpenAttic before, some of the UI elements may look somewhat familiar. So this is basically, from a from a user interface perspective, kind of a blend of what the existing dashboard provided, plus some UI elements that we have adapted from OpenATIC, but already using a completely different architecture in the backend. We are now based on the Cherry Pie web server in the backend, added a RESTful API, and use Angular on the front end for all the web development. So this is not a part of OpenATIC in any form or sense. It's really a completely new development that we started here. But of course, we have kind of taken the lessons and expertise that we've gathered by starting from scratch on a greenfield, and that really helped us and allowed us to avoid a few of the design decisions that have been made in OpenATIC before that turned out not to be the most ideal approach to addressing this. So really greenfield approach, but also of course trying to make it possible that existing dashboard users didn't get confused by this, and it has all the information that was previously available. So we actually went ahead and picked up all of those past contributions that people had added or had contributed to the dashboard V1, ported it over so it's part of the dashboard V2. And it already started also getting some initial management functionality. So the dashboard as shipped with Mimic was already capable of managing RBDs, block devices. The Rados gateway was already there. But since we added management functionality, it needed to be secured, so we added a simple user login mechanism, so you could freely define a user account and a password. We added SSL TLS support out of the box, so it's fully encrypted, the traffic between the web browser and the dashboard. And we made some changes to the layout and UI. So that was the state that we reached by the time the Mimic release was out the door. Ceph Mimic is somewhat special in a way that it's an upstream release of the Ceph project that hasn't really made it into any, well, some but not many downstream products, to say. There aren't that many companies around that have actually started using Ceph Mimic as the basis for their product. And for SUSE, it was just in the middle of the cycle between SUSE Enterprise Storage 5 and 6, which we are currently working on. So there was some uptake, and we've received some good feedback, but I'm expecting to get much more users now with the Ceph Nautilus release, which has just been announced a few weeks ago. So that was dashboard V2, as we call it, in the Mimic release. Let's see. Yep, that's basically it. Moving on to Ceph 14.2 Nautilus that we've just finished not recently ago. And for us, as the team and project, our goal for Nautilus was that we want to be able to add all the missing functionality that OpenATIC still provides and was missing in the dashboard, kind of to bridge that feature gap, make sure that all the functionality that OpenATIC had was redesigned or redeveloped or ported in a way to the dashboard, so customers who want to switch to a newer Ceph version and can make use of all this functionality. I don't have a screenshot yet. We are hopefully going to see a live demo if my laptop doesn't act up. So I'm just going quickly through some of the feature highlights, I would call them, of all the things that have happened in the meanwhile since the Mimic release. So as you may recall, dashboard V2 had a single user with a customizable password. The new dashboard now has multiple user accounts. You can define roles to these accounts, so you can really define a scope of access that this user can have on the dashboard. For example, if you want to create a user that can only manage the Rados object gateway, you can restrict this user's access to only that part of the dashboard. We have designed a number of predefined roles, so to say, that you can assign them to. So if you want to have a block administrator or a pools administrator, all of that can be created fairly easily. Also important in enterprise environments, you don't want to maintain your user database in separate databases all around. So the dashboard as shipped with Nautilus is capable of using single sign-on solution based on the SAML standard. But so far, this is primarily the authentication part. So you still have to create the user and the roles that he has within the dashboard, but the account management, so the enabling or disabling or authentication can be offloaded to an identity provider separately. And with that, we support a wide range of other authentication mechanisms. There are lots of gateways to map SAML to LDAP or Active Directory, for example. So SAML being kind of the de facto standard makes it very easy for the dashboard to plug into these environments. Another essential feature that many users were asking for is auditing capabilities. Now that the dashboard is actually capable of making changes to the system, you need to make sure that you keep track of who did what and when. So on the dashboard, you can now, well, Ceph has a certain level of auditing by itself, but the dashboard has added additional functionality on top of that that really keeps track of all the requests that are being performed, and they're then being put into a log file for you to review if you want to, at some point, want to follow up what has happened at a certain point in time. The landing page, which is the first page that you see when you log into the system, has been completely redesigned. The one in Nautilus still very much resembles the original dashboards with the graphs that we were showing and the amount of data that you can see. That has been completely reworked. I'm going to show you the screen shortly. And also, well, not everyone in the world speaks English, so we've added internationalization support to the dashboard, which makes it possible to translate the UI into any language, basically. We are using the Transifex platform as a public translation system. So people who would like to have the dashboard translated in the language can, in the pure open source sense, actually go there and start translating the strings and submit them to us. And even before we started, we had already full translations for Chinese. We got Polish recently. Indonesian was there. So it's really exciting to see how people are starting to get engaged here and submitting translations to that. We, as the team working on the dashboard at SUSE, will also contribute kind of a batch of languages that we deem important and contribute them to the project. For example, French, Italian, Japanese, and Spanish are some of the languages that we are thinking of. Last but not least, the REST API that the dashboard uses is now automatically documented and very easily accessible through a framework that's called Swagger. That's kind of the de facto standard if you're developing REST APIs. That basically turns the Ceph dashboard backend into an API endpoint that you can use for performing almost any given task in the Ceph cluster, be it creating a pool, creating RBDs. All of that things that you can perform on the command line are also accessible through this unified REST API. Our intention is to make the Ceph dashboard API the default and official REST API for all things Ceph. There currently is a separate module that does similar things, but it's limited in functionality and not actively developed anymore because we are in the transition of using the Ceph Manager, the Ceph dashboard backend as the official API. And yeah, we just recently changed the name. That's why I was just staring. We used to call it the Ceph Manager Dashboard because technically it's a Python module that runs in the Ceph Manager process, but it's not really managing the manager, so we kind of got rid of the manager part in the name. All right, so that's basically new functionality related to the dashboard, but we also added quite a lot of features on the dashboard itself to manage Ceph. Primarily, OSD management was overhauled and enhanced. You can now manage the global OSD settings like no in, no out, no up, and so on. All the flags that have a global impact on the cluster, you can actively mark OSDs as down or out in the UI. You can delete them if you want to. We've added a feature that we call recovery profiles. So one of the things that Ceph OSDs do is that they need to make sure that data redundancy is maintained and they copy lots of data all around by themselves. And these recovery profiles basically give you an easy way to switch between how much Ceph focuses on internal workload of replicating data to maintain the distribution versus serving client workloads. So if you are in the process of maybe adding lots of OSDs or you have to repair a few, you can use this setting to tweak how much time and how much I/O Ceph spends on the repair activity versus serving your client loads. Moving on, config settings editor. That's also something that has started getting introduced with the Ceph Mimic release. Previously, if you wanted to configure Ceph, anything had to go in a ceph.conf config file, which is a plain text file that you would then have to roll out on your entire cluster in order for the nodes to pick up these configuration changes. With the Mimic release, this has been moved into a database that is stored in the mons of the Ceph cluster. And basically all you need on your nodes is just a very minimal config file that just points this node to where to find the monitors. And then they can obtain the entire configuration out of the mon database directly. The Mimic dashboard shipped a config browser, so you could take a look at all the existing settings. With the Nautilus dashboard, you can now actually change them, which is something that makes sense in a way. That one is pretty helpful because Ceph has a ton of settings. I think there are more than 2,000 individual settings that you can change. So this settings editor gives you a very easy way to browse through the existing settings list. You can query them, search for them. And the infrastructure that we've created in the backend can now be used to create very custom UI dialogues for performing individual tasks. And the recovery profiles that I was just referring to would be one example of that. So instead of knowing which settings you have to change to what value, we've simply aggregated them in a single dialog that you can just enable with a switch. And in the background, it does nothing else than just making changes to these config settings. You can still tweak them individually manually if you want to. Pool management has been vastly improved, so the creation of replicated or erasure-coded pools, making changes to existing pools, seeing them in the lists. I'm going to go into more detail in the demo. Erasure code profile management is something that is helpful if you want to define on how data is sharded and distributed among OSDs. Ceph is capable of setting up an asynchronous mirroring replication from one Ceph cluster to another one for block devices. There's now a config option that makes it a bit easier to set up this replication between two clusters by just entering the required values in a field. And similar to what OpenATIC provided, while the Ceph dashboard provides the landing page with some basic information, we have lots of metrics that are being captured by Prometheus in the background, and we're using Grafana to visualize this information. And similar to how OpenATIC did it, we embed those Grafana dashboards into the existing dashboard UI, so it's a seamless experience. You can still access Grafana directly if you want to, no changes there, but just to make it easy, in the context of the dashboard, for example, if you are in the pools list, you click on a pool, you get that Grafana dashboard for that particular pool to make it easy for you. Moving on, actually I have 2 slides full of features. Crush map viewer, that's similar to the implementation that we had in OpenATIC, where you have a graphical representation of the layout of your Ceph cluster, the failure domains that you've defined, where the OSDs are located. We can take a quick look at that one. Just recently, we added the functionality to manage NFS shares, so it's possible to create shares on a CephFS or, well, Rados Gateway S3 buckets as well. And NFS Ganesha is the service that is running in the background for that. So that has been added. iSCSI target management is back again. That was also one of the remaining features that we needed to get in to bridge the gap between OpenATIC and the dashboard. One key change that has happened here is that we have moved to using the upstream Ceph iSCSI framework for managing iSCSI targets. Back in OpenATIC and SUSE Enterprise Storage, we were using LRBD, which was a SUSE-specific implementation of managing iSCSI targets. This has now been moved to Ceph iSCSI. which makes it possible for us to use both the kernel-based iSCSI backstore that we used before in SUSE Enterprise Storage, but we can also make use of the so-called TCMU runner, which is a user-land process for defining iSCSI targets. TCMU runner has a few additional features that the kernel-based implementation doesn't have, so many customers have been asking for that. RBD-QoS is something that we've added, so if you create a block image, you can apply certain limits to it. Well, QoS is a bit, well, I'm not fully sure I agree that it's QoS, it's more rate limiting, but basically you have a way to define an upper limit for IOs and bandwidth that an individual RBD can consume, but you can also define that on a pool or even on a cluster level if you want to. So if you just want to have one dedicated pool with a particular limitation, you can define that on a pool level as well, or override it for when creating an individual RBD image. Prometheus does not just collect data. It's also a monitoring solution that has built-in alerting functionality. Starting with the dashboard in Nautilus, you will actually see those Prometheus alerts in the dashboard, and you will be able to manage and silence them to make sure that you have addressed them and Prometheus is aware that this alert is being taken care of. And last but not least, Ceph Manager Module Management. That's a long word. The Ceph Manager and its modular architecture has gathered quite a lot of additional modules for various functionality, being it a balancer module that helps with making sure the distribution of data in your OSDs is equal. There's a telemetry module that allows you to gather certain data about your Ceph cluster and submit it to the Ceph project. We now have a UI that allows you to enable and disable and configure the manager modules within the Ceph dashboard, which makes it a bit easier to configure them. And with that, I think I'm ready to switch over to the demo, because that's already future. Let me quickly reconfigure my screen. I'll be right back. Setting screen mirror, let's hope that works. And for that part, I'm going to sit down as it's easier to navigate the screens. Okay. So this is the login screen of the Manager Dashboard. As you can see here, you are able to select the various languages that we have added in the meanwhile. I'm going to stick to English to not get confused. And then here you have the way to enter your username and password. This is a demo environment on my laptop, so it's by no means representative, but I hope you can get an impression on how this will look like in a production environment. And if I need to increase the font size, let me know. That's basically the landing page. We've designed it in a way that the information fits into an HD display. So that's the default layout. But the UI framework that we use behind is based on Angular, so it even works on mobile devices. If you want to check your Ceph cluster status from your mobile device, it will just render these widgets accordingly. This is an idle cluster, so it doesn't look that exciting, not much activity going on. But in a production cluster, the PG status likely wouldn't just be clean. You would see more numbers changing here. So I hope, at least for an initial impression, that gives you an overview. Maybe quickly talking about the things that we have up here. As I said, user management has been added, and I'm just going to increase the font size a bit. Right now, we just have a default user, which is the admin user. I can go in here, and as you see, this is the information that we store. And here down below are the roles that we can have for a certain user. Just going to quickly show you how a new user creation looks like. Demo. And I'm just going to give this user a read-only role. So that user has access to the entire dashboard, but cannot make any changes, can't create any new objects or anything. So I created the demo user, and then if we go back.
Well, then, so there are predefined roles, or are you define the roles first?
No, these come out of the box. We have a predefined sets of roles that we. Okay. It's already blocking me here. That might be a bug. Interesting. But as you can see, this is a live demo, so I'm not cheating in any way. Let me get that out of the way. Good thing we're still working on it. Okay.
Is this out in the beta for Storage 6?
Yes.
So users might have, those who are testing the beta may have.
That might be something that you would experience in the beta as well, for sure, yes. So just, yeah, in case you're interested in toying around with this, SUSE Enterprise Storage 6 is actually in beta right now and ships this as part of the product. So it's a public beta test. You can sign up on the SUSE website if you want to take a look. All right, let's see. Good, we have user management. But maybe going back to your question about the roles. So these are kind of the predefined roles that we have, Router's Gateway Manager and so forth. And if you want different roles, well, there basically is a system where we have defined scopes, as we call them. And for each scope, you can define if that user can read, create, update, or delete things in there. So that's how it's currently designed. Moving back, I'm just going to hop through some of the menus to give you an impression. We probably don't have enough time for a full demo anyway. Hosts, as the name applies, this gives you a list of all the servers that your Ceph cluster consists of. In this demo environment, there's just a single host running all of the services like the MDS, the metadata server for CephFS, the Mons, or the OSD. So it isn't that impressive, but if I click on that particular host, I should see, oh, Firefox is giving me a hard time again. No, it's not. Weird. The demo gods aren't that kind to me as I was hoping. Anyway, so I'm daring it, you know. Let me do a reload, but I hope you. No, that's funny. They worked. I was rehearsing before I started this presentation, and the Grafana dashboards were showing. So, arg. But I have a few screenshots that I can show you if you don't mind. So, trust me, it works. But if it would work, if you click on a single host here, you would then see the corresponding Grafana dashboards with some more metrics like CPU utilization, RAM, all the OS-specific workload parameters that Prometheus collects would be shown here. And the overall performance dashboard is basically an aggregation across all of your hosts. So you can see very quickly your outliers. If there's a single host that is kind of heavily loaded, it will show up in this particular Grafana dashboard. Maybe if I click reload here. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's not kind to me. Oh well, happens. Let's move on. Mons. Well, the Mons basically keep track that your Ceph cluster is functioning correctly. We have a dedicated page that shows you the state of all of your Mons. Quorum basically means that they all agree about the state of the Ceph clusters. If a Mon is out of quorum, it would be listed down here. We have a little graph here that shows how many sessions they're currently handling and some related information to that. OSDs is like the page that is more of interest, since the OSDs are those services in your Ceph cluster that do the actual work. They store the data and distribute it across your cluster. So here we have a 5 OSD cluster. As I said, we now have a setting for cluster-wide flags, where I can tell Ceph, for example, well, I don't want the OSDs to go in automatically again, and I don't want them to be up automatically again. Thank you. And then that change is going to be applied. And That already makes Ceph a bit sad. As you can see here, now the heart has turned orange. If I go back here, it's now giving me a health warning because, well, you have set the no up and no in flags. That's bad. I want to recover myself. So that's pretty normal, but I'm doing that on intention. Bear with me. Hopefully that at least works. Another thing that you can set here, as I said, the cluster-wide recovery priority, which basically is defined by these particular values, which are config settings. And we have some predefined settings where you can say, okay, my recovery priority should be low, which means that Ceph gives more priority to client workloads, or the other way around. If I want the cluster to recover faster, it would spend more energy on making sure the data is replicated among the OSDs. I'm setting it to low here. Hopefully that has at least a bit of an effect. And of course, you can override the default values that we've provided here, just in case you have different expectations. But let me go to low and submit. And what I'm going to do now is to be a bit nasty and take an OSD down. Thank you. And to be extra nasty, I'm going to take down another OSD. And with that, let's see. Now we can see here. So one of the things that this new landing page gives us is a very near-term update. So by default, it refreshes every 5 seconds. You can change that refresh interval. In the big cluster, it may make sense you just poll every 30 seconds or so. And now you can see here, okay, my PGs are in a sad state. Good. Just as an example of what the dashboard can look like, going back here. Say again? Yep, that is here on the front page. Available, used by using a mouse over. Yeah, and we have a number of other OSD management things that you can trigger here, like performing a scrub, purging, destroying it, all those things. Down here, yep, Grafana is still not happy, but this would show as a Grafana dashboard particular to that OSD. And with overall, we would have the Grafana dashboard showing overall OSD performance. Okay, let me put them back in. I'm confused. Did I choose the wrong one? No, I'm just going to leave it like that. Doesn't matter for the demo.
Could it be due to the way Grafana was written? Because since an open active, Grafana also has...
Yes. So that's indeed a bit of a challenge. Grafana isn't really designed to be embedded into a different web UI. We're using an iframe here because simply there's no way of taking individual Grafana widgets and placing them on another page. Yeah, that would be better. But as I said, you can, of course, still use the custom Grafana dashboard themselves. This is the config editor. I think I need to move on a bit. So basically, all the config settings that your cluster can be changed, can be modified here. The way this is built up is that the Ceph project has defined certain levels. So there are basic settings, you have advanced settings, and you have developer settings. And if I go on dev, I see a total of 1,560 settings that I can change. And I can set a search query here. For example, if I'm interested in Blue Store-related changes, I can do it that way. Or OSD-specific changes would be that. And if I click on an individual setting, I get some more details down here, what service they belong to, what the default value is, and so forth. And I, of course, can make changes to them if I want to as well. I'm not going to mess with that at this point. So also helpful is that the config database that is included in the mons has a description to each of the settings. So if you're unsure what the setting is about, hopefully most of the times there is a a description that explains in more detail what the setting is about. That part can definitely benefit from some more community love. Some of the settings are very terse in their description. So lots of low-hanging fruit tasks for contributors to get engaged here. The crush map viewer is this one here. So this one is not very exciting. As I said, I just have a single host with 5 OSDs. On each level, I can click to get some additional details. And it also shows me, for example, the state of the OSD in an easy identifiable way. Ceph Manager modules is a pretty recent addition. So these are all the modules that are available. Let me increase that list a bit. And as I said, for example, there's now the IOStat module, for example. Not sure if there's anything that can be configured here. No. Maybe the balancer is a good example. So these are all the settings that can be changed on the balancer module. Bless you. And yeah, you can change them here. Let me just quickly peek on our time. I think we still have some time to go. Good. Yes, question.
Is there a mystery related to the configuration? So every time you change the configuration settings, it is recorded somewhere, so either database or in the
Right. So the config settings database itself only stores the last value that you've changed. You could probably use the audit log to see who did make a change, when, and where. But yeah, that's probably a good enhancement idea. I'm not sure if the Ceph Mon database currently provides that, but
that would be an interesting feature.
Yeah.
Especially if you tune the big cluster.
Right.
Do a lot of change on the
or maybe a way to kind of have a snapshot of the settings, make changes, and roll back to that if you ever want to. Yeah. Good ideas. Okay, so these are the manager modules. We have a logs page here. This is the audit log. At this point, we're just auditing the entries from the Ceph cluster itself. I didn't enable the particular dashboard audit log because it adds quite a lot of churn and noise. We have a patch pending that will add some more features to this logging page to enable you to grab the log, search it for certain entries, and also display just a selected range of dates so you can really quickly drill down. That patch is currently under review. It didn't make it for the initial Nautilus release, but fortunately the Ceph project gives us some leeway in adding more functionality, even though Nautilus has officially been released. So the dashboard will continue to evolve for the foreseeable time, and we still have a number of things that we want to get in. So that's more of on the cluster level related operations. We're here on the Ceph pool level now. Oh yeah, it's not happy. I wonder why. But we are still operational. Maybe we can actually create another pool. So yeah, again, here you would see a Grafana dashboard giving you a cumulative overview across all your pools. The Grafana dashboards, by the way, have been contributed by the Ceph Metrics project. Ceph Metrics was an upstream community project where people gathered and created Ceph-specific Grafana dashboards, and we basically ported them into the dashboard by removing some of the navigation that they've created and trimmed them down to make it easier to embed them into the Ceph dashboard. Let's create a pool. I'm going to create an RBD pool, and from a pool type, well, erasure coded or replicated. I'm going with replicated, but to give you an impression of what erasure coded pool configuration settings there are. You can create EC profiles, for example, instead of the default one. EC overrides is helpful if you want to use this in an RBD context, placement groups, those things. So maybe that's also something worthwhile mentioning. Right now, many places, the dashboard still requires you to be very familiar with Ceph internals and the terminology, I would say. So in many places, like here with creating a pool, this is more or less the same information that you would also have to provide on the command line to perform that same task. And well, that's nice, but not really helpful if you are not that experienced with Ceph. So going forward, now that we have this whole framework and infrastructure in place, we would like to give you more guidance and more of a workflow, in the sense that you basically just ask the dashboard, I want to perform a certain task, or I do have a certain duty that I would like to fulfill. Take me through the steps to get there, so I don't really need to memorize and know all of those settings myself. But that's future work. The first step for us would be able to actually give you an option to provide all that information. Next would be to hide it away from you again, but make it only available if you are an expert, but give some more guidance in many ways. Okay, this is a small cluster, 8 placement groups, and we use the RBD application flag here. So basically, Ceph allows you to add labels or tags to Ceph pools so you can identify what workload they're serving. And RBD is one of the predefined ones that Ceph assumes, well, if you want to store block devices, RBDs, no surprise. Compression mode, I'm just leaving that on none. And now that we are using an RBD pool, we now can define quality of service on the pool level here. So I have a huge number of limitations that I can apply on that pool if I would want to. I'm not going to, but just to give you an impression. No, it's more about concurrency and making sure that not one single workload can kind of eat up all of your bandwidth. Yeah. Okay. I should have probably enabled the OSD again. Oh, no, it's recovering. Let's see. So creating a pool, of course, gives some more activity in the pool, and you can now see how it's working on changing that. Let's give it a bit before it. Okay, but my RBD pool is actually active and clean. Nice. All right, that's pools. Do you have any questions about pools management? In general, if there's anything that you're curious about, just let me know, ask a question. This is an interactive demo, so if you...
Sorry.
Yes?
There's also about cross-map, but it's only restricted to viewable. Can you
Correct.
add a bucket?
No, so the question was about the crush map, and if it's view only, right now, any modifications to the crush map have to go through the command line as usual. This is just a visualization of the hierarchical structure. Block devices. So first part, of course, is RBD images. Usually, well, many times, if you're using OpenStack, for example, or other applications, the creation of RBDs is done through other Ceph mechanisms. So in an existing cluster, you would have a pre-populated list that even might change over time because other applications add RBDs or delete them. But of course, as an administrator, you can go in here and create RBDs manually if you want to. If you want to automate that, well, as I said, the dashboard has this REST API, so you can use scripts to run curl commands against the REST API to perform these tasks. Demo RBD. In the RBD pool, if I had a dedicated data pool, I could select it here. So Ceph is capable of separating the data that an RBD consists of into 2 different pools that can then have different performance characteristics. So 5 gig. I can disable a number of flags here if I want to, and I have some advanced settings. I can change stripe size, or quality of service for an individual RBD could also be changed here. And with that, let me create that one. And there we go. It's up and creating. We've also implemented the trash functionality that has been added. So instead of simply deleting an RBD, I could first move it into the trash. So it's still there, but the trash has kind of an expiry date, and where Ceph starts purging them after a certain amount of time. So in case somebody accidentally deleted an RBD or trashed it, you can still recover it and get it back. I can actually just do that right here. You can create snapshots using this dialog here. So if I want to, for example, I have a base operating system image as an RBD that I want to replicate. I can create a snapshot and then clone it as many times as I want to. You had a question?
So the items burst as part of the QoS program.
Yeah.
Is there a rule of thumb that we can use to put that in place? The Ceph cluster automatically calculates
Right.
how much we can put in there.
Good question. I honestly don't know. Does anyone else have an idea about?
Configurable, it's not automatically calculated.
Yeah.
If you want your applications to be able to have a burst, you need to allow the cluster to burst.
Okay.
Any unique cache steering for that? Or?
No, this is independent of cache tiering. That is the access rate, throughput, IOPS to the cluster. It's not related to cache tiering or whatever.
Okay. Just for demo purposes, I just created a snapshot here. By default, it's just adding a timestamp to the snapshot name, but you can, of course, use whatever arbitrary name you want to. Can then later create it, or can now start cloning it and whatever. So this makes it pretty easy to create kind of golden images that you can then just duplicate and give them out to the users if you want to. Okay, let's move it to the trash. And I can here, could define if I want to a certain or a custom expiry date at which the RBD would disappear from the trash, or I can just go with the overall trash defaults. And of course, can just purge the entire trash here if I want to, if I'm not want to wait for Ceph doing it automatically. And yeah, I can then, of course, get it out of the trash using restore again, or I can finally delete it, yes. Okay, gone is my RBD. All right. Block mirroring, that's one of the features that I've mentioned earlier, that it's possible to have two Ceph clusters that do asynchronous replication. This is the screen that would give you an overview of how the replication is performing. I haven't set it up in this demo environment due to lack of resources on my laptop, but here, for example, is the dialog to add another peer cluster to that RBD pool. And I'm not sure why that doesn't work. Something I have to check. But more stuff to explore at this point. iSCSI is using the Ceph iSCSI now. It's not configured again, so not much to see. I would have to set up an iSCSI target gateway first using deployment tools or whatever, and then configure the dashboard to tell it where to find those gateways. The Ceph iSCSI project has its own REST API that the dashboard uses. So again, and it also has a command line utility. It's basically a wrapper around the LIO utility, command line utility. So if you want to create a new iSCSI target, Ceph iSCSI will make sure that the corresponding RBD is created and has the right flags and so on. So due to lack of time, I'm going to skip that one. D2 for NFS, I'm afraid. But if you are familiar with how Ceph iSCSI and NFS Ganesha were configured in OpenATIC, this is pretty similar. It's been done by the same engineers. We've taken the majority of the ideas and the UI and workflows from there. So that should look very familiar to you if you have seen that one before. CephFS file systems so far shows you the utilization of your metadata servers, what clients are connected. Again, if Grafana wouldn't be nasty, it would show you a Grafana dashboard about CephFS performance metrics here. And last but not least, the Rados gateway, the object gateway. A first overview gives you a list of all the gateways that are enabled in your cluster. Each individual one has, again, a Grafana dashboard with metrics specific to that service. You have an overall performance view that shows you things like top load, how many requests, and all of these things that you would expect. Object gateway user management is also something that you might be familiar with if you have seen it in OpenATIC. It's the same dialogues. You are able to create users, how many buckets you can set a quota on a user basis or on a bucket basis. You can create keys. You can extract those keys and send them to the users here. So all of these things. If those users had created buckets, you would see them in here. So if you want to have a row with just an Rados gateway user, that user would only see that particular part of the screen and could just manage the object gateways, for example. All right, with that, I think I'm through most of the dialogues that we offer right now. Let's see if there's anything else worthwhile showing.
Maybe we can have a look of some of the images you have for Grafana.
Yes, good point. I'm going to do that. Maybe a quick glance on the API, if that works. I need to enable JavaScript here. So as I said, the Ceph dashboard backend has a REST API, and using the Swagger framework, you now see all the available endpoints. And while right now it still says no description available, we had an outreachy intern that worked on adding that functionality. So now it's possible to add documentation about each REST API point to the backend controller directly. That would then be visible here. Yes?
I see you're using Firefox. Are all the major browsers supported?
Yes, they are. Most latest versions of Chrome, Firefox, Safari as well. Those are the ones that we usually test with. We're not really making use of any very exotic or fancy features, so even mobile browsers should work just fine. Okay, that concludes my somewhat limited live demo of the dashboard. There's a question?
The RBD trash feature
Yes.
is available from the Python standpoint as well, because we use OpenStack.
Can you repeat the question? I'm not sure if I got the last part. Yes.
Functionality that is available here in gateway, is it available from OpenStack if we use OpenStack to stream power?
That I honestly don't know. It's a separate call of how RBDs are managed through the RBD library.
API calls available in the documentation.
Yes. Well, it's also available on the command line. So this is a feature that's built into Ceph now, but I'm not sure if OpenStack, for example, already makes use of it. That's something I'm not familiar with OpenStack enough to answer that question. But I think it would make sense now that Ceph has that capabilities. It makes sense making use of them. Okay, switching screens again. And waiting for my confirmation dialog to appear on that screen. And I think I need to unhide those slides. Give me a second. Slide sorter. Yep. So I had hidden them in my presentation because I was hoping the live demo worked as expected, but, well, Murphy struck. That's the first time that this happened. I made this demo quite a few times in the past, but so show slide, and let's go on that one and restart the presentation. So yeah, these are just a few screenshots. Most of them we already talked about. There's a bit more activity here. That's the crash map view that we just saw. Oh, and here's a Grafana dashboard for OSD performance. Ha! I used Photoshop, I just copied that in, you know. Yeah, just a few details of the dialogues that we just talked about. User management, yep, we've seen that. Adding a user, REST API, I think we've seen all of these. Okay, so what's next? So this is basically the state of dashboard in Ceph Nautilus. But there's more. I already kind of alluded to some of the things that we're thinking about, having a bit more usability, more workflows, these kind of things. But also adding more functionality. So one of the things that the Ceph project is working on is the orchestrator, which basically is a way for you to perform operations on your Ceph nodes directly. So right now, the dashboard is somewhat limited in its capabilities because it has to go through the APIs that Ceph provides, creating RBDs and pools. All of this is Ceph built-in functionality, but cycling a disk in one of your servers or adding a new node, these are the things that we eventually want to get to. So you have a dashboard that actually makes it easy for you to add a new OSD from scratch. But that requires orchestration, literally. So one of the things that we're working on is with the various orchestrator communities like there's Ceph Ansible, there is DeepC, which SUSE is working on, which uses Salt to do the orchestration. And then now is an SSH-based orchestrator that we can also use, and kind of having a wrapper or a layer on top of that abstracts the implementation details away. So we want to get to a point where it's easy to just say, create that OSD or give me an inventory of my hardware through a single orchestrator API without having to know how Salt implements it or what Ansible calls I needed to perform that task. So that's ongoing work. The orchestrator can already be used in the dashboard in Nautilus for NFS Ganesha management, if I remember correctly. We obtain some information from the Ganesha nodes through the orchestrator, but it's just very limited in scope. So that's one of the things that we plan to do much more about. There's a meeting planned in June where the dashboard and the orchestrator developers will meet and discuss this in more detail. So just more of these day 2 operations that we right now, of course, can only show at a limited scale. CephFS management is something where we would like to do a bit more than just showing you the existing state of your MDSs. CIFS is something that is being contemplated, so being able to put a Samba server on top of a CephFS, creating shares and configuring them. That's something that many people are looking for. But again, requires orchestrator support because Samba is a completely independent entity. And I think I just need to go back real quick because there's a SUSE-specific slide that I wanted to mention. Yep. So dashboard in Enterprise Storage 6, as I said, is based on the Nautilus version, will continue to evolve until the SES6 release is out. I know, but I don't tell you. Sorry, I am. No. It's, yeah. It will, yeah. It'll be a few more weeks. But the dashboard will have a custom branding. So being upstream is one thing, but we have downstream consumers. We have Red Hat, we have SUSE, and they kind of want to make sure that the dashboard matches their CI and design. So we made it very easy from the beginning to apply a custom branding to the dashboard. And maybe that's worthwhile mentioning, even though SUSE has started this dashboard project with roughly 10 engineers, the dashboard list of contributors has now grown to around 20 people by now. And the other half, almost all of them, are people from Red Hat that we're working with on a daily basis. Fujitsu has started to getting engaged, has assigned a number of engineers there. So we're getting traction and lots of contributions, and it's really exciting to see how this is moving forward. And the aim really is to have the dashboard able to replace OpenATIC and SES6. So we are making a pretty drastic cut, but that's why we are so keen on making sure that we provide all the functionality that OpenATIC had provided, plus more. So that's really...
The reason I ask because I'm not sure whether should I take the exam or the institution.
Say again?
The exam, the storage.
The storage exam? Yeah. Well, the Ceph basics still apply, so I think that's worthwhile doing. Not sure how much there is a focus on the UI on top of it. Yeah. Well, but if...
Will OpenATIC still be accessible in
Source this?
No, it won't.
It's going to take totally.
Yes. We continue maintaining and updating it, and we have made 2 OpenATIC releases in the past few weeks, so there's still maintenance going on, but all the new feature development and the focus is on dashboard from our perspective. And yeah, just a call for action. The dashboard is an upstream community project. As I said, you can add translations, submit bug reports, whatever. We welcome your feedback. If you have ideas, if you find something is kind of weird to use or not intuitive enough. These are the information that we really want to have. There's a number of additional sessions around storage in Ceph at SUSECON. Take a look at that. And if you are very interested in Ceph, there's a dedicated conference, CEPHALACON, coming up in Barcelona in May. And that's it from my perspective. I think I'm a bit out of time already. Sorry for that. I hope I was able to address all your questions during the call. So if you have any additional questions, feel free to get in touch with me right afterwards. Thank you.